It's my pleasure to introduce you to Jim Kim, our moderator today. Jim is a general partner at Builders VC, which focuses on helping founders modernize antiquated industries such as agriculture, healthcare, and real estate. You may recognize Jim from a former life as well. Jim was previously a partner at Coastal Ventures, and he founded Formation 8, serving as its managing partner for many years. He's invested extensively in Proptech, which is only one of the reasons why we've invited Jim to moderate this discussion. The other is the fact that Jim's fund, Builders, has a Canadian connection as well, with their partner, Mark Blackwell, who is himself a 48 Hours in the Valley alumni entrepreneur in our class of 2013. Mark is based in Calgary. So Jim, thank you so much for contributing to today's discussion and for helping us have a great conversation with our Proptech founders. Over to you.
Great, well, I'm excited to be here. This is San Francisco. It's actually one of the first days in the past, 6 or 7 weeks where it's actually blue skies, given it's just been fire season here. Excited to be a part of this. I think for those of you who saw the presidential debate, I think I might actually try and become a Canadian citizen because it doesn't look very good right now. So excited, but again, excited to be here. So we're a San Francisco-based venture capital fund, but we also have offices in Calgary where Mark Blackwell leads our Canadian investment practice. We think there's a lot of great opportunity. Innovation is everywhere. And we love backing companies going after these industries which are traditionally pen and paper industries. We think it's a huge opportunity to go and modernize these industries with technology, really drive efficiency and new business models within these sectors. The commonality across the 4 sectors we're active is that they're trillion-dollar industries, are global, and they're very much in need of technology growth. And for that reason, we're really excited to be working in these spaces. We love Proptech. We call it real estate technology and construction because I think the two go together in this idea of a built environment. We're investors in a handful of companies, including Bowery, which is a real estate appraisal firm, and I see Brad is on. We're an investor in his company, and some really special things are happening in the construction space. We're very excited. We think there's a lot of opportunity to grow. As a firm, we're focused on Series A investments, and our typical check size is between 3 and 10 million US. We're excited to back companies and continue to follow on in these firms as they continue to grow. That's us in a nutshell. I think what I'm really excited about today is the entire real estate world seems to be changing. We are all here in a virtual room because of a massive dislocation that's now changing the way real estate is thought of across the board. And as a discussion today, I'm really excited to get into that and hear from our founders who are really solving problems in this industry and taking advantage of or adjusting to what's going on in this space. So joining us today, we got David from Booqed, Clint from Lane, and Monika from Ratio.City. They're the real stars of the show. I'm just here to facilitate this discussion. Maybe we could go through one by one and people could just give their backgrounds and describe what they're doing. And then from there, we'll jump into some questions that I've drawn up, and then we'll potentially have some opportunity for broader Q&A. But David, maybe we could start with you. Would you mind giving just a quick introduction to you, why you got into real estate tech, prop tech in general, and describe what Booqed does?
Sure, thanks so much, Jim, and hi everyone. I'm David Wong. I'm originally from Vancouver, now based on the other side of the world in Hong Kong. I actually fell into real estate kind of by accident. That's not my background, but for me, Booqed was very much a personal reaction to problems that we were having in terms of just finding places to find, to work or to meet. And that's what Booqed is all about. We're a digital marketplace for tenants and landlords to find or monetize any sort of short-term unused spaces for meetings or for work. So we've got offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, and in Shenzhen, roughly 2,000 listings across 9 markets in Asia at this point in time.
Thank you. Monika, would you mind jumping over to you?
Sure. I had always been fascinated by cities, but again, when I was a kid, I knew that I wanted to grow up and be an architect. And Laura and I were talking about glasses earlier, and so I was actually practicing as an architect. And the reason I found cities so fascinating is, again, cities have been around for millennia, and cities are really complex and they're constantly changing. And there's a lot of data about cities out there, but fundamentally, it's really hard to access. It's hard to synthesize. And so I started Ratio.City sort of as a response to that challenge. And what we do here is we're gathering vast amounts of urban data. So data about the built environment of cities, about the systems that make up cities, whether it's the transit systems, the transportation systems, public assets, political systems, economic systems, whatever those things are. We're bringing together all that data for professionals who need access to it to be able to analyze risks or understand opportunities. So we started with a really specific use case here in Toronto. So we've got some of Canada's largest real estate developers and REITs currently signed up as customers. And we work with their acquisitions and development teams to help them evaluate sites for acquisition for new development. And so we bring together the data about the planning and regulatory framework from the local neighborhood scale to the municipal scale to the regional scale to the provincial level, data about the built environment, transit, and all of that stuff. And then we let our users see all that information really easily in one place, search through it, so run complex queries on the data, and then actually be able to run 3D analysis as well.
Great, thank you. Clint, I guess you first created a successful company at the age of 15, so I'd love to hear about that, and would love to hear about what you're working on now.
Yeah, I've actually been a technologist for as long as I can remember. I started back when I was like 6 years old, programming on the Commodore 64, way back in the day. My first company at 15, it actually wasn't that easy to get on the internet back then. And I don't know if people remember the 90s, but this was like, oh man, this is aging myself, but this was like mid 90s. It wasn't as easy as just calling your telco provider and getting hooked up to the internet. You had to like configure your computer, do all this stuff. So I made like a 3 floppy disk kit that just installed all the software, got you connected to the internet, sold it at the like local Office Depot for $19.99. That's actually how I paid my way through university. So I'm a technologist forever. So I actually have a master's in computer science. This is my 4th company now. This is my first venture-backed company. And I kind of came into commercial real estate and kind of fell into it, kind of as David was saying. Wasn't really an industry I knew much about, but having now been in it for 5 years, I've got a pretty deep dive into it with founding Lane. So Lane is a workplace experience platform. And what that means is we're really providing a universal no-code platform for people to automate any of the workflows that happen within an office building. And we provide this for the whole ecosystem. So you could be the property manager, the owner, a service provider, amenity provider, different teams within the buildings. We really provided this platform for people to automate anything. And currently we're live in 350 buildings in 6 different countries now, with some of the biggest commercial real estate companies.
Excellent, thank you. So I guess I'll kick off. My first question for our panelists here. We're in an environment where, as we talked about, real estate needs are changing across the board, right? People are fleeing cities. It's interesting. San Francisco, I live in a high rise. That building is maybe 30% occupied. Rents have come down 25, 30%. So on the residential side, the world is changing. On the commercial side, New York City, as an example, occupancy of office buildings in New York, even though people have been given the okay to go back to the office, it's about 15%. We talked to our law firm, they're not coming back until June or July of next year earliest, right? So the commercial side of the world is changing. And then on the industrial warehousing side, right, we're now in an environment where everything is online and everything's online delivery. So warehouses, which have traditionally been very boring pen and paper operated organizations or fax machines, they've now had to grow up. because the volume of things going through that has significantly increased. So really across the board, right? Real estate is changing. Would love to ask the panel, and maybe we could start with you, Monika. What are you seeing across the board? Where do you see opportunity? What do you see as some of the changes that are happening, and what do you think is going to stick? Right, there might be a reversion back to the mean here, but what are things that are going to change for good? Would love people's opinions on that.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to push back a little bit because yes, we are seeing those numbers changing in the residential market, and we are seeing in the short term people, there's all the stories that we read about people leaving cities to go escape to the country. But again, when you take a long range view of this, human beings are fundamentally social creatures. There's a reason that this is so weird to do this in little boxes, and we'd rather be doing this in person, right? And human beings have lived in cities for millennia, and cities have seen plagues and pestilence over millennia as well, and they will always recover, they will always bounce back. So my hypothesis is that, yes, we're gonna have a shitty another 12 to 16 months, but once we're on the other side of this, we're going to go back to, living in cities, working in cities, working in office buildings. This is not the end of the office building. This is not the end of high density living. I think that there will be some changes in the short term. And so, of course, because we're providing effectively productivity tools for professionals, our tools allow our users to work from home, to work from anywhere. And again, real estate's a really traditional industry. Nobody had flex hours in real estate before. And so they had to quickly adapt to working from home, on a dime. And we're providing access to legacy data. Clinton mentioned, remember the old days of the internet. We've got some data that dates back from 1986 that predates the internet, that again, usually lives in filing cabinets or in binders on somebody's desk. And when they can no longer get to their desk, that becomes an issue. And so for us to be able to provide, easy to use work from home tools that provide access to data from a variety of sources where you may not be able to access not only the paper copies of documents that are in filing cabinets, but those maps that are living on your server in your downtown office, because you've got these 20-year-old legacy systems that these companies are still dealing with. And so for us in the short term, we're definitely seeing being able to support an agile workforce, and seeing essentially years of people have moved quickly towards this where normally would have taken otherwise years. They were managing to do it in weeks or months.
Monika, a follow-up question before I kick this to Clint or David. You have such great experience in architecture. How do you see architecture changing and designs changing as a result of what we're going through now? Curious to get your view on that for any of those three areas.
Well, and again, if you think about history, right, pandemics and plagues have resulted in impact to built form. If you think back, cholera, pandemics, and whatever, we built sewer systems, we built fresh water supply. Zoning bylaws were a direct result of tuberculosis spread in cities. And so there will definitely be some kind of impact for cities and for buildings for sure. Whether it's better mechanical systems to handle air filtration, again, being able to understand the number of users, the number of people within a building. I think there's huge opportunity there, but fundamentally it always comes down to data and making sure that the data about cities, about buildings is structured and easy to access so that the professionals that need access to the data to make decisions to figure out whether a building is safe, whether it needs a new filter replaced or whatever the case may be, can do some sort of action as a result of the data being available, which currently it's not.
Thanks. Clint or David, any other comments on what you guys are seeing given the real estate needs are changing across the board?
I can, sorry, go ahead, Clint.
No, David, you go for it, man. You're up much later than I am.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, look, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Monika said, and I totally, the idea that the pandemic itself is kind of accelerating trends that we're already seeing. So, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, flex versus core, for example, for office space, that was already starting to happen even pre-COVID. But what we're seeing now, obviously, is a really accelerated trend towards that agile workforce. So, a couple of examples. I mean, I met with a client who happened to be the head of real estate for a major bank. they're looking to shift away, basically eliminate roughly 2 million square feet of office space over this coming year and move towards basically, what we call sort of a mixed workspace, right? That mixture of, say, office space, work from home, flex space, basically, almost like a needs-based kind of workspace. And that is something that we're seeing across the board. The other thing that we're seeing, though, is that, if the idea of the traditional office is not necessarily dead, because there are still requirements. There are still industries where you have to go to the office, right? Whether it's for security, whether it's for infrastructure, whatever. But what we're seeing instead is going to be more of a combination of these various aspects where people are basically working based on their needs. They'll choose a location where they can do their job best.
Clint?
Yeah. Tons of learning. Definitely echo everything David just said. I think the first point is we're actually working with a couple large enterprises who have publicly announced that they're going to a fully remote model. And I think that makes really good headlines, and people love picking up that news, and it means like death at the office. But we're actually working with those companies, and what they actually meant was they're moving to more what David's talking about, more like flex space, more like alternative work. Some of them are even, it's funny, they announced that, and they're even expanding their office footprint as we speak because rates are incredibly low right now. So I think it makes great media headlines that like the office is dead, we're going to be remote forever. But in reality, I don't think many people actually believe that. And I don't think that's what's going to happen. But what it definitely is doing is accelerating things like the adoption of technology, the need for intelligent platforms, the need for more data collection, like Monika's talking about. This, especially in an industry that's traditionally lagged behind in technology adoption, this has really accelerated the whole thing. We work primarily with commercial real estate. We don't work with resi, so this is mostly, residential. This is mostly about commercial real estate, but things like this don't affect most of the large commercial real estate providers because they think in a different time frame than we do. Like they build buildings that they want, that last for hopefully many, many decades. And that's a problem sometimes because it also means that they have these long sales cycles. They've been slow to adopt technology. But on the flip side, they probably already planned something like this into their actuarial models. And big companies like Blackstone, like Brookfield, they're already set up to weather storms like this. So I don't think the office is going anywhere. We'll all be working in an office probably 18 months from now. May change slightly, but if anything, this is really just driving the need for the adoption of smart technology.
Clint, I'm going to ask you a follow-up here because there's something you said, which was, I think, an issue that everybody in this industry faces, which is sales cycles, technology adoption, slow-moving customers, right? When I think of property management firms, we're in a Jones Lang LaSalle building here, and nice people, but even checking a person into the building to get them up through security, whoa boy, right? That system breaks every day. So, how do you think about pushing technology into a relatively technology-resistant buyer base? Would love to hear your thoughts on that. For other folks who are operating in this space, what are some tips and tricks to get people to buy?
Well, one, they should definitely be running lane at that building. We wouldn't have so many problems getting people registered at the door. Perfect. Well, I think one, first of all, a lot of people just entering this industry are in luck. It's already gone through the first, 10% of early adopters. We've already done a lot of the hard work and laid down all the groundwork to get these companies to start, adopting technology more rapidly. Like JLL has a tech incubator. They have an investment arm now. So does CBRE. So does Colliers. So does Blackstone. So does Brookfield. They've all started to create these incubators, accelerators, investment vehicles to actually speed adoption. So I think it's actually getting a lot better. But fundamentally, we're talking about the built world, and it's always going to move a bit slower than the tech industry is used to. It's just the reality of dealing with the built environment and the physicality of building skyscrapers and installing hardware. And huge budgets and having to like go retrofit your buildings to like meet building codes. That's just a reality of being in this environment sometimes. So we're accelerating it as fast as we can, but don't expect that it's going to be ever as fast as a regular tech industry. The tips for working in the industry, I think, are, go target the early adopters that are already embracing technology. Don't go try to focus on the laggards or the people who are still a bit reluctant or haven't bought into it. You're just making it so much more difficult for yourself. And it's such a huge industry. Like Lane, we've got, 370 million square feet of coverage. That's not even a fraction of 1% of global coverage in this market. Like our market share sounds huge, but it's actually a tiny, tiny percentage. You don't need to go convince the laggards. Go work with the early adopters. There's enough there to go build your base and build a company for the next 5 years, even just working with the early adopters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I've got a couple of other, ideas or observations from my years in the industry. And I mean, I think there is a complexity of engagement, as a startup, as a sort of a new company coming out of nowhere with one of these established companies, the Brookfields. They've got millions of properties, giant portfolios. And, the sort of tech adage of fail fast and fail often definitely does not resonate with their mentality. It's the opposite. And I think my observation is that, the industry is very suspicious of tech for just tech's sake. And it is an industry built on those hard assets, those actual skyscrapers, those pieces of dirt, but it's actually, those assets are actually built on interpersonal relationships. And so for me, what I've observed though, tech has the potential to disrupt those relationships, and that's what's sometimes quite threatening. And so as a startup, we also recognize that there's a spectrum of complexity to integrate ourselves into their existing processes. And so to integrate individual tools for individuals, productivity tools is one thing. To integrate larger business processes is much more complex because it requires buy-in from the whole organization. And so we were able to get our foot in the door by providing individual tools for a very specific use case. And now that we've landed, now we've built credibility, we've built those relationships, now we can expand into helping them with their business processes. But to just walk in to help them with their business processes as a startup would be remarkably difficult. Getting your foot in the door, building relationships and credibility was kind of our way in.
Yeah, the definitely, I would definitely echo what Clint says in the sense that, not all developers are created equal. They have very different perspectives in terms of where they are and openness towards a technology adoption. And we see this out in Asia where, we're actually working on a couple of pilots with some large developers here. There's some we're not even bothering to talk to because we know that it's going to be just such a long sales cycle that they're not open to it. But so that's one part. The other part is also, look, I would highly recommend looking at some of these accelerator or sort of incubation programs that are being run by these developers, because that provides a really, really powerful way to actually start talking about pilots, to get them familiar with what you do. So for example, both Lane, Clint and I were part of the Techstars program in Toronto. Great way to kind of get connected with Colliers and just be able to do stuff with them. That was a great baseline to start the ball rolling.
David, follow-up question there. You're a bit unique in that you are, as a marketplace, you have two sides of the marketplace they have to sell to, right? Supply side, demand side. And getting a critical mass. All marketplaces have a cold start problem, right? That's one. And then, getting the other side to buy, requires almost two different sales skill set. So would love your view on, how do you solve that cold start problem? And then secondly, what's your viewpoint? How have you structured your team? How have you thought about attacking both sides of that marketplace? Because I think a lot of companies who are by definition marketplaces have to solve a similar type of issue.
Yeah, that is really, it's a really good question, and candidly, it's one that was honestly, and Charles, my co-founder, who's also happens to be on, this is something that we had massive discussions and debates over, because on the one hand, like a traditional marketplace, you're told it's always about supply, secure that supply, and make sure that you can grow that. What we found, though, also, part of this, and it's just, I think, the nature of the business, that if you can have the demand, the supply actually follows as well. So I'll give you a great example. We recently closed a pretty big deal with Tencent for their Singapore office move. Fantastic deal for us. But what we found was just, with this deal in hand, being able to talk to, any number of potential suppliers in Singapore, doors open, because of course it was a strategic deal. It was a bird that you had in hand. It was a massive revenue opportunity. So, from our perspective, I mean, what I would say is that it's a problem that we're still trying to get a handle on, because what we're seeing is that sort of the behaviors aren't necessarily following what you might see in a typical marketplace play, where, oh yes, you get the supply and then you can worry about the demand. We're seeing actually that having the demand can actually open up doors on the supply side as well.
Monika, similarly, how are you thinking about sales, defining a value proposition for your end customer? How have you built the sales playbook? Have you thought about, you obviously are the leader and the chief salesperson, but how are you thinking of then scale, right? And growing the organization? Because without sales, no revenue, you're not a company, right? So.
Exactly. So, I mean, right now we've been working on a direct sales model. And again, when we're talking to prospects, we can demonstrate, productivity. We've priced it as a productivity tool. And so we can demonstrate that we can save, an analyst on your team 20 hours or 30 hours of research per month, that has a specific value. We demonstrate that we can save, outside consultant fees. And so instead of going out to a professional consultant and waiting 2 weeks for a 30-page PDF report, you can get that same answer in minutes. And so there is a specific sort of ROI calculation that we can demonstrate. But I think the bigger value that, once we're in an organization, we can demonstrate is the competitive advantage of being able to move quickly. One of the earlier conversations I was in is, take more shots on net, as it were. And now that we're in at these organizations, we're able to also integrate ourselves more into their business systems. So in addition to providing them access to the data outside of their organizations, we're now hosting their data on our platform as well, and allowing them to combine their private and proprietary data to run complex queries. So an example is we're working with the City of Toronto and the agency that manages their real estate portfolio. So they have a secure layer that shows every single piece of property that they own. It's color coded by asset class, and now they can help support the mayor's affordable housing initiative to find sites the city owns that are close to transit, that are within a specific councillor's ward, that have a zoning policy that allows affordable housing in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's leveraging those initial relationships, that initial productivity gains, and then being able to expand the value as we increase the product offerings.
Clint, you've adopted an interesting strategy, which I think some entrepreneurs consider it, bolting on a product offering, maybe to acquire customers or to offer additional features. Can you talk through your acquisition of this tenant engagement platform? What was the logic behind it? When should an entrepreneur think about making an acquisition? What's the decision process there, the buy versus build strategy?
Yeah, great question, actually. I think it's rare that a company that just did a Series A would make an acquisition. I think in this case, it was very much like stars aligning, kind of influenced by COVID as well. Like COVID has gone out and distressed some companies that fundamentally have a lot of value. But a lot of people are looking at, short-term effect of COVID in a industry that's pretty long-term. So I think we got kind of lucky with a great amount of value. I think if you're looking to do an acquisition, it's a lot of work, to be honest. It's tons of work. If we didn't have our investors have our back, and our investors just happen to have like an M&A background, I don't think we would have done it. I think we would have incurred too many legal fees. It would have taken too much time. But because we had the support of our investors who are great at M&A, and we just happen to know eService already and have a relationship with them, and COVID was kind of distressing some stuff, it all just kind of made sense. We're just now integrating them into our company. So I'll let you know in like 6 months whether it was fundamentally a great decision or not, but it definitely seems like one still at the moment. I think when it comes to, we're a technology company at our core, so it's unlikely we're going to go acquire technology. But what we will acquire is relationships, a client list, or even just something for marketing potential. I think that's really what we did in this case. I think it made a lot of sense for us to go do it. As a technologist, usually trying to integrate some other tech into your platform doesn't work that well, unless you know so well that it will and you've done a deep dive and an investigation. And if you look at all the roll-ups that have been done in like the enterprise SaaS world, it's a pretty janky experience. Companies have rolled up so many companies into theirs, and you're still kind of on the other platform still when you're using it, or they've moved over some features, but it's not complete. So I think it's pretty rare that from a tech standpoint, you're going to be able to acquire something, roll it in, and it's going to work seamlessly. In this industry, it made a lot of sense to make this move, though.
Great. I think we have a bit of time for questions. So, Laura, I think maybe people can put questions into the chat. Is that the best way to?
Yep, absolutely. So feel free to put questions into the chat, and I think we'll do our best to moderate them. We do have, let's see here. I mean, I had a question actually based on something that Clint said that was so interesting about the acquisition. And I was just wondering if you could share more about the support that you actually got from your investors. Like, who are those investors and what did they actually bring to the table that gave you and your team leverage?
Yeah, for sure. So round 13, you probably know Bruce from Dragon's Den.
Yeah.
They're a great local Canadian VC. We actually ended up, it's interesting, we actually ended up choosing a Toronto-based investor over Valley ones or New York ones because they were local. And it meant that we could like go down the street back pre-COVID days and actually like knock on their door and like have a quick conversation with them. And that's actually paid off really well in the last, we just did our round like 4 months ago, but it's paid off well even in the last 4 months of having somebody local who gets Toronto, who we are. They understand us, the market that we're in, the faces that we're being challenged with by being a Toronto company. So I'm even personally shocked at how choosing a local investor kind of paid off, because we weren't 100% sold on the idea. And also they happen to have like a strong M&A competency. That's just something they had in-house. And that is not also why we chose them. We just kind of lucked out on that. We weren't even assuming that we would go do an M&A route. So I think actually there's probably, looking back in hindsight now, I think like good advice would be really think about what you're trying to do with your company and the route you're trying to go take. If you think that a roll-up play, like an acquisition consolidation play, is really going to work for your company, it's in the cards, you may want to work with a team that has a strong like competency in that. That may actually pay off a lot. Honestly, I kind of lucked into it. Again, it was kind of like the stars kind of aligned on something that worked out really well. So I can't take credit for having the foresight of doing this.
Cool, thanks for that. Let's open it up. So you can use the chat or you can raise your hand. I can see folks who are raising their hands as well. And I'm not referring to your physical hand, though you could technically do that on video, but there is a little function that lets you raise your hand. Any questions that anyone has for Clinton, for David, for Monika, or even for Jim?
I guess let me ask one question while questions filter in. What do people? So the point of this panel was the linkage to Silicon Valley, and clearly, there's a lot of capital here, right? That's one of the big benefits of being in this zip code. There are 7 or 8 VCs right around the corner who kind of club together. How are you all thinking about capital needs for the company going forward? What are you looking for in that next round of financing? And then how are you reaching those investors, right? Because cold calls, I'll tell you from when I said cold calls rarely work. So How are you thinking about reaching the investors that you are targeting? I think the whole CEO community could benefit from your all thinking on that.
I can start with that one.
Okay.
I just talked a lot though, but does anybody else?
I was going to say, I'd love to hear from David on this one too, just given your location, David, and that added complexity of time zones and stuff.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, what we found, and look, Jim raises a really interesting question because obviously Silicon Valley is such a hub for fundraising, and it is, it's not just the fundraising, but it is sort of the depth of knowledge and the depth of experience that you get with that. And that's one thing that we saw very, very clearly when we were at Techstars in Toronto. I mean, we were going through our, we just launched our seed round at the time, and look, we found a couple of both opportunities, but as well as challenges. And the challenge, I think, for an overseas company such as ourselves, not being based in North America, was that quite simply a lot of the LPs simply would not, it was outside their remit. So we had a lot of doors slammed in our face. People said, hey, we like the business, but you guys are not in North America. So therefore, we cannot, or we're not prepared, we just don't think we can add value. So I think that's one sort of baseline challenge that we do have, sort of being out in Asia. Having said that, look, I mean, from our perspective, our current status is when COVID hit, I think like many tech companies or many startups, we took a very hard look at our burn. We took some steps to really reduce expenses, unnecessary expenses, really, I think, cut that to the bone. What we've seen since then, though, in the months following, is that we're now back on a growth trajectory. I mean, we've hired, we are growing, and that for us is something that we are looking at. I mean, in terms of our next round, we are not currently planning a round, but our sort of timeline to start the process would be sometime next year in 2021. Part of it, I think, is just a realization that, look, I think, we're getting mixed messages out in Asia, where investments are a lot slower out in Asia. Equally, what we're hearing, though, and I'm, from some of our investors in North America, the ones that did invest, they're saying, well, actually, there's no COVID discount being made, and there seem to be some interesting opportunities. But our plan is basically to really start that ball rolling, sort of second quarter next year.
Clinton?
Yeah. In terms of our strategy, we did a pretty intensive Series A process. And I think when, we learned a lot along the way, we probably talked to over 100 VCs. I think we're going to nurture those relationships because there were a lot that expressed interest in joining like the Lane team and coming on board as investors, but maybe we just didn't have the right metrics, or they couldn't sell it into their partners well enough. And we had, buy-in from some like key people at that firm, but we couldn't get it past like the partner stage. So we're going to nurture those relationships starting now. Actually, we're going to send out monthly updates. It's like a little marketing nurturing campaign that we're running for the next X amount of months until we actually go back to market for a Series B. So I would predict that, yeah, you're totally right. Cold calls don't work well. It's got to be relationship based. It's got to be, it's probably going to end up, whoever invests in your company, you had a relationship with them, maybe because you met them at a startup thing at some point, or they're on a panel like this and they heard you and they liked you. That it always comes like that. I would be shocked if somebody had like a story where it was like, I cold called a VC, I got a bunch of money from them. I would be shocked if that is a real story out there. So I think it's all relationship based. So just, start looking for the investors that you really like, nurture those relationships, give them a bunch of updates. And if you have a good product and the right metrics, I think COVID or not, you're going to be able to raise money.
Yeah. No, and when we did our pre-seed last summer, essentially we were able to get some of our early customers on as, or our early adopters on as initial investors. And then we got an institutional investor out of New York. And again, we've been leveraging his relationships as well. And so he's been able to make introductions for us, across the New York network, across the Silicon Valley network. So I think that's been, quite interesting and valuable. And I think something we talked about on our sort of earlier call was, when talking to general more generalist VCs, explaining the market sizing. There's a handful of funds out there that are interested in prop tech and understand real estate. And again, those of us who are in the industry, we know that this is a giant $1 trillion opportunity, but because, others may not be as familiar with it. There does seem to be always be a disconnect between, hey, they read about 30% vacancy rates or, 50% vacancy rates, in the building down the street. How does that actually translate to the long term? And there's a sort of, bit of a disconnect. So I'd love to hear from Clinton, how he was able to, package the messaging about the market sizing in his discussions.
Yeah, it was an interesting one because we would talk to some VCs who just are not familiar with the fact that real estate's a market that tech is involved in. It's really interesting. It's not on anybody's radar. Well, it wasn't anyways back then. It still may not be. It's kind of the same as like picking your clients. Like if you're talking to a VC who just does not know anything about this market, it may not be in your best interest to educate them on it because there's so many VCs out there. Maybe it's easier just to go to the next one. Sometimes like that is a good strategy and like your time's very valuable. But usually the way we explain it to them is, and this worked pretty well because we're in commercial real estate. We actually said, what do you think the top expenses for the companies that you invest in are? And it's going to be people first. Second is office space. So like most of the money that you're putting out as a VC is actually going to pay all of our clients. And that actually got a lot of them thinking like, oh, wow, I'd actually never thought about that. So sometimes you can help them connect, but I'd probably honestly recommend just going to ones who already know the industry well. It may not be worth your time to educate them.
Mm-hmm. That bodes well for Jim there at Builders.
Well, I would say there are an increasing number of real estate specific funds that are popping up. Some fairly sizable ones like Fifth Wall, or even in the construction space, Brick and Mortar Ventures. Quite a few funds that are specialized are popping up. So that's great. They're partners to work alongside you, but also potential competitors when you're when you're in the game of, hey, I want to take the majority of the Series A round. So good and bad, I guess, from the venture capitalist perspective. Another question I have for David and Monika. We as a venture firm, we invest in people, right? The reason why we invested in Go4 is Brad is a force of nature, right? So how are you all thinking about recruiting? Because ultimately, companies are made up of people and you want the very best people. To me, the best way to de-risk a company is to have somebody who has knocked that problem out of the park before, right? Whether it's a sales problem or an engineering problem. So what is your philosophy? How are you bringing in truly great people into your company? Where are they coming from?
That's a really good question.
That is really interesting. And I mean, I'm going to just sort of speak to our experience to this point. And we've found that we grew our team by finding folks who are really passionate about this city building problem. And so again, they find us on Twitter, they find us on social media. Our first employee was a guy who just could not stop building digital maps. Like he just loved building digital maps. And so we were able to bring him on, and we knew that he was going to just build these amazing digital visualizations of geospatial data, because that's just what he did. And interestingly enough, when I hired our first sales exec, she also did not have a background in sales, but she had a background in the industry. So she spoke the language, she had those relationships, and we were able to teach her tech sales because she could connect to the industry in a very, very direct way. And so that's worked really, really well for us and has let us, build that credibility very quickly, and as opposed to coming in as an outsider, providing a solution to an industry that we may not be so intimately familiar with. And so when we're thinking about scaling, we're looking for people who are actively engaged in these kinds of conversations, on social media, who are leaders in their space, who are interested in finding, are frustrated with the status quo, or looking for new ways of solving these complex problems.
Yeah, I would totally agree that passion is such a powerful thing. If you can find somebody who is passionate and is smart and is switched on and is geared towards solving problems, I think some of the skills can actually be trained. From our perspective, I think the one thing that I would say, and look, I mean, there are certain positions we've been hiring for where it was extremely difficult to find, and I'm talking about, for example, our product person and our engineering lead. These were positions which, for whatever reason, just finding the right skill sets as well as the mindset was extremely difficult. And I think, for us, the one thing that I would say that we've learned is never hire out of desperation. I mean, you might want to settle for, oh, okay, I just need a bum, a bum in a seat. And, as difficult as that is, and as sort of limiting as you feel that could be, we made that mistake, I think, quite early on. And we hired just almost out of desperation. We just needed somebody. And that really did backfire on us because it took a toll on culture. It took a toll in terms of just our progress of our company. So, what I would say is that, no matter how desperate the need is, sometimes it is better to wait to find that right person, that person who is geared towards getting stuff done, who can fit into the culture of the company that we're trying to build.
Great. Well, I think that is, if there's any more questions for these three, let's take it now. One more question from our audience, if any, and if not, I think it's a good place to wrap. Okay, do I see any hands raising here? No. Hey, I think it is a great place to wrap. Is that okay with you, Jim?
Yeah, this is fantastic.
Wonderful.
Really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, excellent discussion. I want to thank the three of you, Monika, Clinton, and David, so much for sharing and being so giving with your ideas here. And Jim, thank you so much from the C100. We really appreciate you stepping in here and leading this discussion.
Excellent. Had a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Laura.